This is my true story. I heard my son on the phone telling his friend that I disgust him, that he hates me, and that he's just waiting for me to die so he can get my money and finally be free of me. I was standing right outside his kitchen window and heard everything. Every single word cut through my heart like a knife. I gave that boy everything I had, sacrificed my entire life for him, and this is what he really thought of me. So I made a decision that changed everything. But you won't believe what happened next. Before that, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. And please subscribe to this channel so that my stories can reach more people. I loved my son more than I loved myself, more than I loved anything in this entire world, and I would have done absolutely anything for him without a single moment of hesitation. From the day he was born, I knew that my life had a new purpose, that everything I did from that moment forward would be for him, and that I would spend every breath making sure he had the best possible life I could give him. His mother left when he was just 2 years old, said she wasn't ready to be a mother, said she needed to find herself, and walked out the door, never to return. So I raised him alone, just me and my boy, against the world. And I never once complained, because he was worth every struggle and every sacrifice. I worked 2 jobs for most of his childhood, just to make sure we had enough money for everything he needed and wanted. I worked construction during the day, hard physical labor that broke my body down piece by piece over the years, and then I worked security at a warehouse 3 nights a week just to bring in extra income. I was exhausted all the time, always tired, always pushing through, but when I came home and saw my son's face, everything felt worth it. I made sure he had good clothes even when I wore the same worn-out shirts for years, made sure he had hot meals even when I sometimes skipped eating myself, and made sure he never felt like he was missing out on anything because he didn't have a mother around. When he graduated high school, I cried tears of joy because he was the first person in our family to get a diploma, and I was so proud that I could barely speak when I hugged him that day. I paid for his college education in full, every single semester, every single textbook, every single expense, even though it nearly bankrupted me and I had to take out loans I couldn't really afford. I believed in his future more than I believed in my own, and I would have worked myself into the ground just to see him succeed in life and become something better than what I was. After college, I helped him buy his first car because he needed reliable transportation to get to his new job, and I co-signed on his first apartment because his credit wasn't established yet and the landlord needed a guarantor. When he met his wife and they decided to get married, I paid for the entire wedding, $50,000 that I had saved over decades of working and sacrificing, because I wanted his special day to be perfect and memorable. I co-signed on their house because they couldn't qualify for the mortgage on their own, and I gave them the down payment as a gift because I wanted them to start their married life without that burden hanging over them. I never asked for anything in return, not a single dollar, not a single favor, not anything at all, because that's not why I did it. I did it because I loved my son, and I believed that's what fathers are supposed to do, sacrifice everything for their children and expect nothing back except love and respect. I believed that the bond between a father and son was sacred, that blood meant something real and permanent, and that my boy would always be grateful for everything I did, even if he never said it out loud. I believed I had raised a good son, a grateful son, a son who understood that his father's love was unconditional and infinite. Every decision I made in life for the past 40 years was made with him in mind, wondering how it would affect him, wondering if it would help him, wondering if I was doing enough to secure his future. I worked myself half to death building a small construction company that eventually became successful, and I always assumed that one day everything I built would go to him because he was my only child and my only family. I never remarried, never had other children, never built relationships outside of my son because he was my entire world and I thought he felt the same way about me. I was wrong, so completely and devastatingly wrong, and I wouldn't find out the truth until that horrible evening outside his kitchen window. The changes in my son didn't happen overnight, but crept in slowly over the years, like a poison that spreads through the body, so gradually you don't realize you're dying until it's almost too late. At first I thought I was imagining things, thought maybe I was being too sensitive or reading too much into small moments, But the coldness kept growing, and I couldn't pretend it wasn't there anymore. He stopped calling me on weekends to check in, stopped inviting me over for Sunday dinners, stopped asking my opinion on anything important in his life, and started treating me like I was a stranger he was forced to tolerate rather than the father who raised him and gave him everything. When I would visit his house, he would barely look up from his phone to greet me, would give me short one-word answers when I tried to have conversations with him, and would check his watch every few minutes like he was counting down the seconds until I would leave. His wife treated me the same way, cold and distant, like I was an inconvenience that interrupted their perfect little life, and I always felt unwelcome in a house that I helped them buy with my own money and my own credit. I started making excuses not to visit because the rejection hurt too much, but then I felt guilty for not trying harder, so I kept showing up and kept getting treated like garbage. He started rolling his eyes whenever I spoke, like everything I said was stupid or boring or not worth his precious attention, and he would sigh dramatically when I called him on the phone like talking to his father was the greatest burden anyone ever had to endure. He corrected me in front of other people when I mispronounced words or got facts slightly wrong, embarrassed me publicly like it gave him some kind of sick satisfaction, and made me feel small and worthless every chance he got. I started second-guessing everything I said, started staying quiet instead of talking, started shrinking myself down to avoid his criticism and his contempt. He uninvited me from his daughter's birthday party 2 years ago because he said I would embarrass him in front of his wife's family, said I didn't fit in with their social circle, said I would say something stupid or wear the wrong clothes and make him look bad. I stayed home that day and cried alone in my house while my granddaughter celebrated without me, while photos were taken that I would never be in, while memories were made that I would never be part of. He didn't apologize later, didn't acknowledge what he did, just acted like it was completely normal to exclude your father from his own granddaughter's birthday because he was too ashamed of me. I blamed myself for everything, wondered what I did wrong to make my son hate me so much, stayed up at night replaying every moment of his childhood trying to figure out where I failed him. I thought maybe I wasn't educated enough for him now that he had a college degree and a professional career. Thought maybe my blue-collar background embarrassed him around his white-collar friends. Thought maybe I should have been more refined or sophisticated or whatever it was he wanted me to be. I tried harder to earn his love, called more often even when he didn't answer, sent birthday cards and gifts even when he didn't acknowledge them, and kept showing up even when every visit left me feeling worthless and broken. The worst part was that I excused his behavior, made justifications for why he treated me the way he did, told myself he was just stressed from work or busy with his family or going through a difficult time. I refused to accept that my son simply didn't love me anymore. Refused to believe that the boy I raised had become someone who saw me as nothing more than an embarrassment to hide and an inheritance to collect. I kept hoping things would change, kept believing that one day he would wake up and remember that I was his father and that I had given him everything. But that day never came, and instead I discovered something so much worse than I ever imagined possible. It was a Thursday evening in October, and I had been invited to my son's house for dinner, which was rare enough that I was actually excited about it and spent the whole day looking forward to spending time with my son and his family. I left my house early because I wanted to stop and buy flowers for his wife and toys for my granddaughter, hoping that maybe these small gestures would help warm things up between us and remind them that I cared about them deeply. I drove across town with the windows down, feeling hopeful for the first time in months, thinking that maybe things were finally going to get better between me and my son. I arrived at his house about 30 minutes earlier than expected because traffic was lighter than I anticipated, and I decided to just go up to the door rather than sit in my car waiting because I was eager to see them. As I walked up the driveway toward the front door, I could hear voices coming from inside, could hear my son talking loudly about something, and I figured he was on the phone with one of his friends because his wife's car wasn't in the driveway. I was about to knock on the door when I heard my name mentioned through the open kitchen window, and something made me stop and listen instead of announcing my presence. My son was laughing about something, that casual, cruel laugh I had heard him use before when he was mocking someone, and then he started talking about me in a way that shattered everything I thought I knew about our relationship. He told his friend that I disgusted him, actually used those exact words, said that being around me made his skin crawl, and that he could barely stand to look at me anymore. He said that I was pathetic, said that I embarrassed him every time I opened my mouth, said that having me as a father was the worst thing that ever happened to him and that he was ashamed to share the same blood. Then he said the words that destroyed me completely, the words that I will never be able to unhear no matter how long I live or how hard I try to forget them. He told his friend that he hated me with everything he had, that the only reason he even tolerated my existence was because he was waiting for the inheritance, and that he was literally counting down the days until I finally died so he could get my money and be free of me forever. He laughed while he said it, laughed like my death was a punchline to a joke, laughed like the idea of me dying was something that brought him genuine joy and anticipation. I stood there frozen in that driveway, unable to move or breathe or process what I had just heard. The flowers dropping from my hands onto the concrete, tears streaming down my face as I listened to my only son describe how much he wished I was dead. He kept going, kept piling insult on top of insult, told his friend that I was worthless and stupid and a waste of space, said that the only good thing about me was my bank account and my properties, said that once he got his inheritance, he would finally be able to live his real life without the embarrassment of having me around. His friend asked him why he kept inviting me to things if he hated me so much, and my son laughed and said it was all about keeping up appearances and making sure I didn't suspect anything before I died and left him everything. He said he had to pretend to tolerate me so I wouldn't cut him out of the will, said he had to fake being a loving son so I would keep giving him money and helping him out financially, said that every dinner invitation and every phone call was just an act designed to secure his inheritance. I heard everything, understood everything, and felt my heart break into a million pieces that could never be put back together again. I walked back to my car without knocking on the door, drove home in complete shock, and sat in my living room for hours, replaying those horrible words over and over in my mind until I couldn't cry anymore. I sat in my living room that night staring at the wall without moving for what felt like an eternity, my body physically present, but my mind somewhere far away, trying to process the unimaginable betrayal I had just witnessed with my own ears. The tears had dried on my face, but the pain in my chest was so intense that I genuinely wondered if I was having a heart attack, wondered if the shock of hearing my son's true feelings about me was actually killing me the way he so desperately wanted. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard his voice again, heard that cruel laughter, heard him talking about my death like it was something to celebrate and look forward to. The son I had given everything to, the boy I raised alone after his mother abandoned us, the man I sacrificed my entire life to support and provide for, was sitting in a house I helped him buy, talking on a phone I probably paid for, laughing about how much he wished I would hurry up and die so he could finally collect his inheritance. Every sacrifice I made over the past 40 years suddenly felt like a cruel joke, like I had been pouring my love and money and energy into a black hole that gave nothing back except hatred and disgust. I was nothing to him except a bank account with a heartbeat, an obstacle standing between him and the money he felt entitled to. I thought about all the meals I skipped so he could eat, all the nights I worked double shifts so he could have new clothes and school supplies, all the vacations I never took so I could save money for his college fund, all the dreams I gave up so he could pursue his own dreams without financial worry. I thought about the wedding I paid for, the house I helped him buy, the car I purchased for him, the countless checks I wrote over the years to make his life easier and more comfortable. I gave him everything a father could possibly give, poured my entire existence into making sure he had opportunities I never had. And in return, he was counting down the days until my heart stopped beating so he could cash in on my death. The weight of his words pressed down on me so heavily that I could barely breathe, and I found myself gasping for air in my empty living room like a man drowning on dry land. I tried to find excuses for him, tried to tell myself that maybe he was joking, maybe he didn't mean it, maybe I misheard something, but I knew in my heart that I heard exactly what he said and he meant every single disgusting word that came out of his mouth. He wasn't pretending or exaggerating for his friend. He was being completely honest for the first time about how he truly felt about me. And that honesty was more devastating than anything I had ever experienced in my entire life. I looked around my house at all the photos on the walls, the pictures of my son growing up, his graduation photos, his wedding photos, the images I had surrounded myself with because they reminded me of happier times and gave me hope that our relationship would improve someday. Now those same photos felt like evidence of my own stupidity, proof that I had been fooled for decades by a son who saw me as nothing more than a meal ticket and was just waiting patiently for me to die. Every smiling face in those pictures was a lie. Every happy memory was tainted by the knowledge that he was already calculating what he would inherit and how he would spend it. I didn't sleep that night, couldn't close my eyes without hearing his voice describing how much I disgusted him, couldn't relax my body when every muscle was tense with grief and anger and a profound sense of betrayal that went deeper than anything I had ever felt before. By the time the sun came up, I had cried until I had no tears left, had questioned every decision I ever made as a father, and had started to realize that the relationship I thought I had with my son never actually existed outside of my own hopeful imagination. He never loved me, probably never respected me, and was only pretending to tolerate me so he could secure his future inheritance. For the next several days, I walked through my life like a zombie, going through the motions of eating and sleeping and existing while my mind was trapped in an endless loop of questions that I couldn't answer, no matter how hard I tried to understand what had happened to my son and why he had grown to hate me so completely. I replayed every moment of his childhood searching for clues, searching for the moment when I failed him so badly that he learned to despise me, searching for the mistake I made that turned my loving son into a monster who wished me dead. I couldn't find it because I don't think it existed, but that didn't stop me from torturing myself with the possibility that this was somehow all my fault. I asked myself what I did wrong over and over again until the question became a kind of madness that consumed every waking thought and invaded my dreams when I finally managed to fall asleep from pure exhaustion. Did I work too much when he was young and not spend enough quality time with him? Did I push him too hard in school or not hard enough? Did I give him too much money or not enough? Did I embarrass him at some important moment that I don't even remember but that scarred him for life? I searched through 40 years of memories looking for the answer to why my son hated me, and all I found was evidence of a father who loved his child more than anything, and a child who apparently never loved his father back. I wondered if maybe his wife poisoned him against me over the years, whispering criticisms in his ear until he saw me the way she wanted him to see me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't fair. Because my son was an adult, capable of making his own decisions and forming his own opinions. I wondered if he was always this way, and I was just too blind to see it, too desperate for his love to notice that it was never really there in the first place, too invested in the fantasy of a loving father-son relationship to recognize the cold reality that I was being used. The possibility that my son had been faking affection for decades just to secure his inheritance made me feel sick to my stomach in a way that physical illness never could. I thought about all the times I excused his cruel behavior, all the times I blamed myself for his coldness, all the times I tried harder to earn a love that apparently didn't exist and never would no matter what I did or how much I sacrificed for him. I gave him everything I had, and it still wasn't enough. Not because I failed to provide, but because nothing would ever be enough for a person who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle between him and money. He didn't want my love, didn't want my guidance, didn't want my presence in his life at all. He just wanted me to die quickly and leave him rich so he could finally be free of the burden of pretending to be my son. The hardest question was why. Just simply why would my own flesh and blood hate me so deeply when I had never done anything to hurt him, never raised my voice at him, never failed to support him in everything he wanted to do with his life? I couldn't understand how a person could receive so much love and generosity from another human being and respond with nothing but contempt and death wishes. Couldn't wrap my mind around the cruelty of counting down the days until your father dies so you can inherit his money. What kind of person thinks that way? What kind of son wishes death on the man who gave him life and sacrificed everything to give him opportunities? What kind of monster had I raised without even realizing it? The questions haunted me for weeks, followed me everywhere I went, kept me awake at night and distracted during the day, but eventually I realized that the answers didn't really matter anymore, because nothing would change what I heard through that kitchen window, and nothing would change the fact that my son wanted me dead. The only question that mattered now was what I was going to do about it. And slowly, the grief started transforming into something harder and more determined. That night, I sat alone in my house, surrounded by darkness and silence, the kind of heavy silence that presses down on you and forces you to confront thoughts you've been trying to avoid. And I finally allowed myself to really think about what I was going to do now that I knew the truth about my son and his feelings toward me. For decades, I had operated under the assumption that everything I built and everything I saved would eventually go to him because he was my only child, and passing wealth down to the next generation seemed like the natural and right thing to do. But now that assumption felt like a cruel joke that I had been playing on myself without realizing it. My son wanted me dead so he could inherit my money, had actually said those words out loud while laughing with his friend, and had admitted that every interaction he had with me was just an act designed to keep me happy enough not to change my will before I died. If I did nothing and simply continued living my life the way I had been, I would be playing right into his hands, giving him exactly what he wanted, rewarding his cruelty and deception with a substantial inheritance that he had done absolutely nothing to earn except pretend to tolerate my existence. The thought of my money funding his comfortable life after I died, knowing that he would probably celebrate the moment he got the news that his father finally died, made me physically sick. I realized that I had two choices and only two choices, and the decision I made would determine the entire trajectory of the rest of my life and his life as well. I could do nothing. Continue being the naive father who believes his son loves him. Leave my estate to him when I eventually died, and let him win by getting exactly what he wanted after years of secretly despising me and wishing me dead. Or I could take action, completely upend his expectations, remove myself from his life entirely, and make sure that not a single dollar of my hard-earned money ever made its way into his ungrateful hands, no matter how long he waited for me to die. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that doing nothing was not actually an option, because I couldn't live with myself knowing that my son was just waiting for me to die. Couldn't sit at his dinner table making small talk while knowing he was calculating how much longer he had to put up with me. Couldn't pretend that everything was fine when everything was absolutely destroyed beyond repair. The relationship I thought I had with my son was already dead, had probably been dead for years without me realizing it, and the only thing keeping up the illusion was his greed and my blindness. Now that I could see clearly, there was no going back to the comfortable lies I had been telling myself. I decided that night that my son would not get what he wanted, would not inherit a single penny of my wealth, would not be rewarded for years of hatred and deception with a comfortable payout when I finally died on whatever schedule he was hoping for. If he wanted me gone from his life so badly, then I would give him exactly that, would remove myself completely and permanently. But I would take everything with me and leave him with nothing but the empty space where his inheritance used to be. He thought he was playing a long game, thought he was being clever by pretending to be a dutiful son while secretly counting down the days until he could collect his reward. But he had no idea that his father had discovered the truth and was about to change the rules entirely. I called my lawyer the next morning before I could talk myself out of it, before the grief could soften into forgiveness, before I could convince myself that maybe I misheard, or maybe he didn't mean it, or maybe things could still be fixed between us. I told my lawyer that I needed to make some major changes to my estate, that I needed to sell off assets, that I needed to restructure everything I owned, and that I needed to do it quickly and quietly, without anyone knowing what I was planning. He asked if everything was okay, and I told him no, everything was not okay, but it would be soon because I was finally taking control of my own life and my own future. The process of liquidating my entire life took about 3 months. 3 months of meetings with lawyers and accountants and real estate agents. 3 months of signing papers and transferring assets and watching decades of hard work convert into numbers on a bank statement. I started with my construction company because that was the largest asset and would take the longest to sell properly without raising suspicion or losing value by rushing the transaction. I had built that company from nothing over 30 years, had poured my blood and sweat into every project, had created something I was genuinely proud of, and now I was letting it go because my son had made it impossible for me to enjoy the fruits of my labor, knowing he was just waiting to inherit them. I found a buyer who was willing to pay a fair price, a younger man who reminded me of myself when I was starting out, hungry and ambitious and willing to work hard to build something meaningful. We negotiated for several weeks, went back and forth on the details, and eventually settled on a price of $1.8 million for the business, including all the equipment and the contracts and the reputation I had built over 3 decades of quality work. Signing those papers felt like cutting off a piece of my own body, like amputating something that had been part of me for so long I couldn't remember who I was without it. But I did it anyway because I knew it was necessary. Next, I sold my house, the home I had lived in for 25 years, the place where I raised my son and built my life and created memories that I now realized were tainted by his secret hatred and his greedy anticipation of my death. A real estate agent came and took photos, listed it on the market, and within 2 weeks we had multiple offers from families eager to move into a nice neighborhood with good schools. I accepted the highest offer, $750,000, and I didn't even feel sad about leaving because everything in that house reminded me of my son and the betrayal that had destroyed everything I thought I knew about my life. I sold my cars, my boat, my rental property on the other side of town, my stocks and bonds and retirement accounts. Everything that could be converted into cash was converted into cash over those 3 months, until I had liquidated every single asset I owned. The total came to $3.2 million, more money than I ever thought I would have when I was a young man working construction jobs and barely making ends meet. And every penny of it was now sitting in bank accounts that my son had no access to and would never benefit from, no matter how long he waited for me to die. My lawyer drew up a new will at my instruction, a document that explicitly stated my son would receive absolutely nothing from my estate, $0 and 0 property and 0 inheritance of any kind, regardless of any previous promises or expectations or assumptions he might have had. I directed that upon my death, my entire estate would be donated to charities that help abandoned elderly people, organizations that support seniors who have been neglected or abused by their own families, causes that would actually do some good in the world instead of funding the comfortable life of a man who wished his father dead. The irony of my money going to help elderly people abandoned by their families while my own son got nothing felt like the perfect form of justice. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing, not my son, not his wife, not any mutual friends or family members who might have warned him that something was happening. I worked quietly and efficiently, tying up loose ends and closing accounts and making sure there was nothing left behind that could benefit the person who had betrayed me so completely. My son continued to call occasionally during those months, continued to pretend to be a loving son, continued to play his role without knowing that his audience of one had already seen behind the curtain and was no longer fooled by his performance. Every fake conversation with him strengthened my resolve to follow through with my plan. Every hollow expression of concern reminded me of what he really thought of me, and every interaction confirmed that I was making the right decision. Once everything was sold and the money was secure in accounts my son could never access, I began planning the final phase of my transformation from the naive, loving father he had exploited to the ghost he apparently always wanted me to become. I researched places I could go where I would be far enough away that he couldn't easily find me, where I could start fresh without the constant reminders of my old life and the son who had destroyed it, where I could live out my remaining years in peace without waiting for the phone to ring with another fake expression of concern from someone who secretly wished I was dead. Canada felt right because it was close enough to be practical, but far enough to feel like a completely different world, and Toronto seemed like a city big enough to disappear into. I applied for the necessary paperwork to establish residency, found a real estate agent in Toronto who helped me locate a comfortable apartment in a quiet neighborhood with good public transportation and easy access to parks and shops, and began the process of transferring my life from one country to another without leaving any trail that my son could follow. I opened new bank accounts in Canada, set up automatic transfers for my money, established relationships with local doctors and lawyers and accountants who would help me manage my affairs from my new home, and made sure every detail was handled properly so I could simply vanish when the time came. The night before I left, I walked through my empty house one last time, through rooms that no longer contained furniture or photos or any evidence that a family had once lived there and been happy together before everything fell apart. I stood in my son's old bedroom, the room where he slept as a child, the room where I read him stories and tucked him in and told him I loved him every single night, and I felt nothing but emptiness where the memories used to make me smile. That little boy who used to run into my arms when I came home from work had grown into a man who wished me dead, and there was nothing left in this house worth holding on to. I booked a one-way flight to Toronto, departing at 6 in the morning, early enough that no one would notice I was gone until I was already in another country and unreachable by anyone who might try to stop me or talk me out of it. I left no note, no explanation, no forwarding address, nothing that could help my son figure out where I had gone or how to contact me in my new life. I changed my phone number before I even boarded the plane, set up a new email address that my son didn't know about, and systematically erased every connection between my old life and my new one, so that finding me would require effort he was probably too lazy and entitled to actually make. When my plane landed in Toronto, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, maybe years, a lightness in my chest that I eventually recognized as relief mixed with something close to hope. I was free, actually free. Free from the burden of pretending my son loved me. Free from the pain of trying to earn affection from someone incapable of giving it. Free from the humiliation of being secretly despised by the person I loved most in the world. My son would wake up eventually and realize his father was gone, would discover that the house was sold and the business was gone, and the inheritance he had been counting on had completely vanished along with the man he couldn't wait to bury. I imagined him trying to call my old number and finding it disconnected. Imagined him driving to my house and finding strangers living there. Imagined him contacting my lawyer and being told that all my assets had been liquidated and I had left no forwarding information. He wanted me gone from his life so desperately that he was willing to wait for death to make it happen. So I decided to grant his wish early and remove myself completely while simultaneously taking away the only thing about me he actually valued. He wanted a dead father who left him money. Instead, he got a disappeared father who left him absolutely nothing, and I hope the irony burned him every single day for the rest of his miserable life. It took about 2 weeks for my son to realize something was seriously wrong. 2 weeks of me not answering calls he probably assumed I was just missing. 2 weeks of him being too self-absorbed to actually check on the father he claimed to care about, but secretly wished dead. I imagine he finally drove to my house expecting to find me there, going about my normal routine, only to discover that strangers were living in the home he grew up in and that nobody knew where the previous owner had gone. I imagine the confusion on his face, the dawning realization that something had changed dramatically without his knowledge, the panic setting in as he understood that the inheritance he had been counting on might not be as secure as he thought. Somehow, he managed to get my new phone number, probably through bribing someone at my old cell phone company or hiring a private investigator or using some other method that desperate people use when they realize the thing they've been waiting for is slipping through their fingers. The first call came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was sitting in my new apartment in Toronto drinking coffee and watching the snow fall outside my window, and I let it ring through to voicemail because I had no interest in hearing his voice after what I had learned about his true feelings toward me. He left a message, the first of many, and his voice sounded panicked and confused, and nothing like the confident, cruel laughter I had heard through his kitchen window. He said he was worried about me, asked where I had gone, asked why I sold the house without telling him, asked me to please call him back because he was concerned about my well-being and wanted to make sure I was okay. The hypocrisy was almost impressive. The way he could fake concern for a father he openly wished dead when he thought no one was listening. The way he could pretend to be a loving son when his carefully constructed plan to inherit my money was suddenly falling apart around him. I deleted the message without responding and went back to enjoying my coffee and my peaceful view of a city where no one knew me or expected anything from me. The calls kept coming, sometimes 3 or 4 times a day, each voicemail more desperate than the last as he gradually pieced together what had happened and realized the full extent of what he had lost by revealing his true feelings where I could hear them. He apologized in one message, said he was sorry if he ever made me feel unappreciated, said he loved me and needed me to come back so they could talk about whatever was bothering me. In another message, he cried, actual tears that I could hear in his breaking voice. Said he didn't understand why I would abandon him like this when he had done nothing wrong. The audacity of claiming he had done nothing wrong after I heard him describe how much I disgusted him and how eagerly he was waiting for my death was almost enough to make me laugh. His wife called too, left her own messages filled with concern and confusion, asked me to please reach out because the whole family was worried and they didn't understand what was happening. Friends I hadn't talked to in years called after my son apparently gave them my number, left messages asking me to please contact my son because he was devastated and couldn't understand why his father had disappeared. Everyone wanted answers. Everyone wanted explanations. Everyone wanted me to come back and pretend that nothing had happened. But I had no intention of giving any of them what they wanted because I had finally stopped sacrificing my own well-being for people who didn't deserve it. I listened to every voicemail he left, not because I wanted to hear his voice, but because I wanted to remember exactly how he sounded when he was desperate. Wanted to contrast his panicked pleas with the cruel laughter I heard when he was talking about how much he wished I would die. The difference between those two voices told me everything I needed to know about my son, showed me that he was only capable of expressing love or concern when he wanted something, proved that every emotion he displayed toward me was calculated and false. I saved some of those voicemails as reminders of why I left, evidence that I made the right decision, proof that my son only cared about me when his inheritance was threatened. I have been living in Toronto for almost 2 years now, and I can honestly say that these have been the most peaceful and content years of my entire adult life. Years free from the constant stress of trying to earn love from someone incapable of giving it, years without the burden of being secretly despised by the person I sacrificed everything to support. My apartment is small but comfortable, a cozy 2-bedroom unit on the 12th floor of a building filled with friendly neighbors who actually seem happy to see me when we pass in the hallways or share an elevator ride down to the lobby. I wake up every morning without dread, go to sleep every night without tears, and spend my days doing exactly what I want without worrying about whether my existence is inconveniencing or disgusting anyone. I made friends here, real friends who enjoy my company and invite me to dinners and movie nights and card games without any ulterior motives or secret hatred simmering beneath the surface of their smiles. My neighbor Margaret is a retired teacher who lost her husband 5 years ago. And we have coffee together every Sunday morning while sharing stories about our lives and commiserating about the challenges of growing old without the family support we expected to have. Another neighbor named Robert is a widower who loves fishing, and he takes me out on his boat during the summer months where we sit in comfortable silence watching our lines and enjoying the simple pleasure of being alive without anyone wishing we weren't. My son still calls, even after 2 years of silence from me. Still leaves voicemails that I listen to but never respond to because there is nothing he could say that would undo what I heard through that kitchen window or erase the knowledge that he spent years waiting for me to die. His messages have evolved over time from desperate panic to angry accusations to pitiful begging, and back again, cycling through emotions like someone working through the stages of grief, except the thing he's mourning is not his father but his lost inheritance. He apologizes constantly now. Says he was wrong, says he didn't mean whatever I heard, says he loves me and misses me and needs me to come back so things can go back to normal. But there is no going back. Not after what I heard, not after he described in detail how much I disgusted him and how eagerly he was counting down the days until my death freed him from the burden of pretending to be my son. Some words can never be unsaid, some betrayals can never be forgiven, some wounds cut so deep that they change the fundamental shape of a relationship forever and make it impossible to pretend things are the way they used to be. I heard my son's true feelings about me, heard him laugh about my eventual death with his friend, heard him admit that every interaction we had was just a performance designed to secure his inheritance. And no amount of apologizing or begging or crying can make me unhear those words. He lost $3.2 million because he couldn't keep his hatred hidden, because he was so confident that I would never find out how he really felt that he laughed openly about wishing me dead, where anyone walking up to his house could hear him. He lost a father who would have done anything for him, who loved him more than life itself, who would have continued sacrificing and giving until there was nothing left to give, all because he couldn't resist expressing his true feelings to a friend on the phone. I hope he thinks about that loss every single day, hopes the knowledge of what he threw away haunts him the way his cruel words haunted me. Hopes he understands that his greed and hatred cost him everything while giving him nothing in return. I loved my son with everything I had for 40 years, gave him every opportunity and every advantage and every dollar I could spare, and he repaid that love by secretly despising me and eagerly anticipating my death. So I gave him what he wanted, removed myself from his life completely and permanently, disappeared like the ghost he always wished I would become, but I took everything with me and left him with nothing but regret and voicemails that will never be returned. He keeps calling, keeps apologizing, keeps begging for a second chance, but the father who loved him is already gone, and the man who replaced him has no interest in being hurt again.